Welcome to the Time to Practice Summer Edition. This series is meant to give you a little weekly burst of inspiration, motivation, or food for thought about music learning and music practice for young musicians each week before we restart Season 4 in September. You'll hear tips from past expert guests, listeners, and even, I hope, tips from young musicians themselves this year, and I can't wait to share them with you. Whenever you listen to this episode, whether it's in the summer or throughout the year, I hope these episodes speak to you and give you actionable advice that you can use. You're listening to episode 129. It's always been my goal to keep this podcast free of outside ads, but I think it's also important to know that podcasts do have those ads to support the time and production costs of making episodes and to make it possible for the show to exist. So this summer, I think I'll just share some ways that you can support the podcast and keep it going. A few of them include sharing an episode that you enjoy with a friend, your colleagues, some of your students and their families, submitting a tip for an upcoming summer episode through the link in the show notes. You can rate or review the podcast anywhere you listen. Subscribe wherever you're listening to this episode so you're sure to hear upcoming episodes. And as always, anytime you buy one of my books or sign up for a workshop or purchase a past recorded workshop, those purchases directly support my work and help keep this resource going. All right, on to today's show. Today we are reviewing and revisiting some practice advice from a past expert guest and music educator, Bryson Tarbet, back from episode 6 of the podcast. There are a couple pieces of practice advice that Bryson shared with us that I think many of you will find helpful or find helpful to hear again, and maybe even helpful to share with your students and their families. Bryson Tarbet is a passionate advocate for inclusive music education. And since he first spoke to us, he has made the leap from a career as a pre-K through 6th grade general music teacher to a full-time instructional coach. You can find some of his resources through his podcast, That Music Podcast, that caters specifically to elementary school teachers. And he also spearheads the Elementary Music Summit, which is a platform for professional development and community building. I'm excited to share his practice advice with you today. Sounds like especially singing and performing was your joy. I wonder what practice has felt like to you. You can talk about as an adult or as a child, but I am always curious, did people love to practice? What was hard about it? Things like that.
Kind of goes into that piano piece again. Singing has always come really easy to me, and I really didn't have to practice that much. And it really came and bit me in the butt when I got to undergrad and was like, that's not an option anymore. You have to practice. You're going to struggle, and I struggled a lot. I was there, especially my first couple juries. I'm like, I barely know these songs. Like, they are not memorized. Like, we are making up some Italian, and I really had to learn how to practice because it was something that no one really teaches you to do. It's like, all right, well, you need to make sure you're spending time in the practice room, and I think it can be really easy to spend hours and hours in the practice room but get nothing done. And that's where again, when it comes back to the piano, is I didn't practice, or even if I was in the practice room, I wasn't practicing right. I wasn't actually making any progress. So then I'd feel frustrated, so then I wouldn't want to practice anymore. And that's kind of one of those things that I've taken with me in my teaching, especially in my private teaching. I work primarily with very young children. I think my youngest is 4 and my oldest is like 8. So I work with very young children, and I want practice. I'm like, hey, if you want to practice 5 minutes a day, that's fine. Like, you don't need to sit down for 30 minutes every day and do that, because I want you to keep the love of it and I want you to keep enjoying it. But I think it's important for us to break down the process of what good practicing looks like, so that our students are able to recreate that at home. Because I think we've all been in lessons where we're like, well, why did I do that? The professors go, they just like show you one thing, and you're like, well, that just solved all the problems that I've been fighting for the past 2 weeks. So, unlocking the processes of how to practice is something that's really hard to teach, but I think it's really important.
I agree. And I always want to hold that we love music in really high regard. Like, that's my biggest goal. So I don't want us to crush that in the process. And I don't think we have to when we're practicing. What would you say to a parent who is curious, why their child isn't liking practice, or what's the first tip you would give a student in your studio that is having some struggle wanting to practice?
I just think the more that we can gamify practice, the more that we can increase that intrinsic motivation to allow our students to want to practice. And it's one of those things, building a relationship is great because, when if the student likes you and you have a good relationship, a good working relationship, they're going to want to do right by you. So if you say, "Hey, we should really work this out. By the time you come back here, you should really have this part of your song, kind of fleshed out," then you want to because you have the relationship. You want to do right by them. But, when it comes to gamification, using things like iPad apps or, printable resources, or, I have, especially with the younger kids, I use cards to basically trick them into playing the song again. But, all right, oh, this time we're going to try it, but at a low octave, and we'll see how that sounds different. They're still practicing those skills. They're still doing things, but it's changing it up for them. It's gamifying a little bit so that they can stay engaged throughout the lesson and throughout their practice.
So important. I know sometimes there can be a feeling from parents, for example, like, well, let's just get things done and not waste time with a game. And so I think remembering why we're playing the game and that, okay, you can work really hard in practice, sometimes harder than without a game. So it's really worthwhile.
For sure. And the students are going to remember that. They're going to latch onto those skills a lot more than if we would just kind of done them in a quote unquote traditional way.
Right. I think that's really important. I saw a quote recently that it takes, 400 repetitions to learn something for a child, but then if there's a game or fun involved, it cuts those repetitions down dramatically, and it just really helps our brain.
For sure.
Well, I was wondering, if you could wave a magic wand and share one thing about learning music with parents, because I know we have parents that listen to this podcast thinking about their own children practicing. What do you wish parents knew about music and children?
Oh, I guess I don't know. My brain goes immediately to motivation and, trying to find ways to get that intrinsic motivation because, you can give stickers all you want. You can do, all right, you practice and then we can do this and all you want. But until you get that intrinsic motivation, until you get it, the students want to practice without receiving something. So that's what it's going to really hinder you until you get that. And the ways that we can do that is, again, through gamification, through practice that doesn't necessarily look like practice. And I think that that's something that, especially a lot of us that have taken piano lessons, maybe in a more traditional setting, have to kind of unlearn is that the way that we learn music doesn't have to look the same way that we learned it. It can look different. It can be more, centered around the child. It can be truly differentiated. And it isn't really about just, following a book, page to page. Sometimes it looks like just being a kid. And I think that's what you can really do to get them engaged, to get them involved, and to get them to really love what they're doing.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think there is this myth of like the serious, pianist, for example, sitting on the bench, like totally focused. And then if we think of a 4, 6, even 8-year-old student, we're probably not going to see that a ton.
Yeah.
Because I didn't practice like that as a young kid. So I think that can be surprising to parents sometimes, and just realizing it doesn't have to look, serious and, without joy at any time.
For sure. I think that whenever you can put some joy in the lesson, it's never going to be something that is going to hurt you.
Exactly. And I like parents to think about that. Okay, we're trying to help them develop a love of music, whether or not they're a pianist for life or violinist or whatever instrument. We still want them to love it. So how do we help them learn and love it at the same time?
For sure. 100%.
I wondered if you could share a little bit more about the work you do with and for teachers and anything you wanted to share about that.
For sure. So I kind of came out of college and I really, like a lot of us that came into the elementary music world, felt really well prepared to teach high school band or high school, or secondary choir. But unfortunately, the elementary level kind of gets put on the back burner just because of the reality of how full the degree is. So I've been doing a lot of work helping elementary music teachers, especially those that are kind of early career, or maybe they made a career shift and now they're in the elementary world for the first time, to really kind of fall in love with teaching and understand the joy and not really feel overwhelmed by it. So I do a lot of work with, setting up procedures and things that kind of set everyone up for success, because not only does that help us as the teachers, but it helps our students. We're setting everyone in the situation up for success. I do have a free guide, the Elementary Music Newbie Guide, for elementary music teachers to kind of think through some of these systems. If you want to grab one, you can head to thatmusicteacher.com/newbie. That's NEWBIE. And that is some things that I did my first year of teaching that kind of brought me through these processes to help everyone be successful.
Great. And then I think I saw recently you post something about some cards, and I think you mentioned them earlier, that sort of prompt a creative way to practice. So if people can go to your website too and see what other resources are there.
Yes. So if you head over to thatmusicteacher.com, you can find a link to go to my Teachers Pay Teacher store, or you could just head to Teachers Pay Teachers and search That Music Teacher, and you will be able to find those as well.
Yeah, I thought that was a great idea. I do that sometimes. Yours were much prettier, but just some ideas like with violin students, like, okay, you have to play this and spin in a circle or stand on one leg, or, just some ideas of how do we just inject some fun and creativity into the things we're doing over and over again.
Yes.
Yeah, really important.
Yes, I love it.
And I think what you said about motivation, it usually clicks for my older students, middle school, high school, like, oh, I want to practice to improve this piece of music. But it's usually not something that clicks for really young students yet. It is like, this is going to be fun in some way.
Yeah.
And then we're motivated by that if it's not the piece of music itself.
Definitely.
Well, I always like to just wrap up and ask people to share one tip about practice. It could be something we've already said or something new, but just to kind of tie a bow on the conversation and think about what we want to send listeners off with that they could use right away.
If I boil everything I've learned down into one tip about practice is that, well, one, do it. That's always helpful. But, it doesn't matter how long you practice if you're not doing it in a meaningful way. So, even if, instead of practicing 1 hour, practice 5 hours every day, or 5 minutes every day, but do it in a really meaningful, focused, have a plan and really do it in a way that's going to work for you and for what your goals are.
Right. We're not just putting in time, but we're trying to actually make things better. Absolutely.
Exactly.
Yes. And I love your first tip of just like, we just have to do it in the first place.
For sure.
Well, wonderful. I'm excited to share where people can find your work and your resources. And thanks so much for taking the time to talk to us today.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for listening today. I hope you found this advice about practice from Bryson Tarbet to be helpful as you head into the practice room this week. I'm wishing you all a wonderful week of music and engaging practice sessions. Take good care.